the late hour and remote location that Alexander initially thought he might be imagining it. But as they drew closer, the voices became clearer, and Alexander realized they were approaching some kind of gathering or activity that he had never known existed. Marcus approached a clearing where Alexander could see the warm glow of lanterns and what appeared to be a small group of people. As his eyes adjusted to the scene, Alexander was stunned by what he discovered. In the clearing was a makeshift camp with several simple tents and basic cooking equipment. But this wasn't just any camping trip. Alexander realized he was looking at what appeared to be a small community of people, including several children, who seemed to be living in this hidden area of the castle grounds. The group included men, women, and children of various ages, all gathered around a modest campfire. They were sharing food from simple bowls and engaging in quiet conversation that spoke of familiarity and comfort with each other. The children appeared well cared for despite the basic living conditions, and there was an atmosphere of warmth and community that Alexander had never experienced in his privileged but isolated life within the castle walls. Marcus was greeted warmly by the group, who clearly had been expecting him. Alexander watched as Marcus distributed what appeared to be food items and supplies, likely taken from the castle's kitchens. The interaction was filled with genuine gratitude and affection, with children running to hug Marcus and adults clasping his hands in thanks. Alexander realized he was witnessing something profound. Marcus was not just a castle servant, but someone who was using his position to help people in need. As Alexander continued to observe from his hidden position, he began to understand the full scope of what Marcus had been doing during his mysterious late-night excursions. This wasn't a one-time occurrence, but rather an ongoing effort to provide support and assistance to what appeared to be a group of people who had nowhere else to go. The realization hit Alexander like a physical blow. While he had been wallowing in his privileged loneliness, Marcus had been quietly dedicating himself to helping others. Alexander watched as Marcus sat with the group, sharing their simple meal and participating in their conversation with an ease and authenticity that the prince had never witnessed in castle interactions. The servant's entire demeanor was different here, more relaxed, more genuine, more himself. It was clear that these people saw Marcus as a friend and benefactor, rather than someone bound by formal protocols and social hierarchies. The scene continued to unfold before Alexander's amazed eyes as he realized the full extent of Marcus's secret activities. The group appeared to be families who had fallen on hard times, possibly displaced from their homes due to economic hardship or other circumstances. Several adults showed signs of recent manual labor, suggesting they were trying to find work while living in this temporary situation. The children, despite their circumstances, seemed happy and well cared for, playing quiet games and listening to stories told by the adults. Marcus had brought not just food but also blankets, basic medical supplies, and even some books and toys for the children. Alexander watched as Marcus quietly examined a young boy's scraped knee, cleaning and bandaging it with gentle care that spoke of either medical knowledge or simply deep compassion. The interaction was tender and patient, showing a side of Marcus that Alexander had never seen during their brief castle encounters. The realization that this had been happening regularly, likely for months or even years, without Alexander's knowledge was both humbling and shocking. While he had been focused on his own isolation and discomfort with royal life, Marcus had been quietly making a real difference in the lives of people who needed help. The contrast between Alexander's self-pity and Marcus's selfless action was stark and embarrassing. As the evening progressed, Alexander found himself deeply moved by the community he was witnessing. The people in the clearing had created something beautiful despite their difficult circumstances, a sense of family and mutual support that transcended their temporary living situation. Children were being read bedtime stories. Adults were sharing quiet conversations about their hopes and plans, and everyone was contributing to the collective well-being of the group. Alexander realized that Marcus had not just been helping these people survive, but had helped them maintain their dignity and sense of community during what was likely one of the most challenging periods of their lives. The servant's actions went far beyond simple charity. This was genuine care and ongoing relationship that had clearly developed over time. Marcus spent several hours with the group, helping with various tasks and simply being present with them. Alexander watched as the servant assisted an elderly woman with organizing her possessions, helped a father practice reading with his young daughter, and listened intently to a teenage boy's concerns about finding work. Each interaction was marked by patience, respect, and genuine care that Alexander had rarely witnessed in his own social circles. As the night grew later, Alexander saw Marcus beginning to prepare for his return to the castle. The servant packed away the supplies he had brought and made sure the campfire was properly maintained for warmth and safety. The group's gratitude was evident in their farewells, warm hugs, clasped hands, and quiet words of thanks that spoke of deep appreciation for Marcus's ongoing support and friendship. Alexander remained hidden as Marcus began his journey back toward the castle, his mind reeling from everything he had witnessed. The servant's secret activities had revealed a depth of character and purpose that Alexander found both inspiring and deeply challenging. While Alexander had been questioning his own value and purpose in life, Marcus had been quietly demonstrating exactly what it meant to use one's position and resources to make a meaningful difference in the world. The walk back to the castle gave Alexander time to process what he had discovered. Marcus's actions weren't just charitable. They were subversive in a way that could potentially get him in serious trouble if discovered by castle authorities. The servant was taking significant personal risks to help people who had no other options, using his access to castle resources to provide aid that likely violated several employment policies. Alexander found himself grappling with complex emotions as he made his way back to his chambers. On one hand, he was inspired by Marcus's courage and compassion. On the other hand, he was forced to confront his own privilege and the ways he had been wasting opportunities to make a positive impact. The contrast between his complaints about isolation and Marcus's quiet heroism was uncomfortable but necessary for Alexander to acknowledge. As Alexander finally returned to his room, he was unable to sleep. His mind kept returning to the scene in the clearing, the warmth of the community, the genuine care Marcus had shown, and the realization that meaningful action had been happening right under his nose while he had been consumed with his own problems. The discovery had fundamentally changed his perspective on both Marcus and his own potential role in the world. The next morning, Alexander found it difficult to focus on his usual royal duties. During breakfast, he watched Marcus serving other members of the royal household with the same quiet efficiency he had always shown. But now Alexander saw him with completely different eyes. The servant's professional demeanor took on new meaning when Alexander understood the depth of compassion and courage that Marcus possessed outside of his formal work role. Alexander struggled to act normally during their brief interactions, fighting the urge to acknowledge what he had witnessed. He wanted to express his admiration for Marcus's work, to offer help or support, but he wasn't sure how to approach the subject without revealing that he had been essentially spying on Marcus's private activities. The secret knowledge created a strange tension in their usually simple exchanges. Throughout the day, Alexander found himself analyzing his own life and choices with new clarity. Marcus's example had shown him that having access to resources and position meant nothing without the courage to use them for good. While Alexander had been paralyzed by the weight of his future responsibilities, Marcus had been quietly taking action to address immediate needs in his community. The revelation also raised difficult questions about the systems and structures that Alexander was part of. If people were living in such desperate circumstances that they needed to camp on castle grounds, what did that say about the kingdom's care for its citizens? How many other Marcus-like figures were working to address problems that the royal family should be handling through official channels? Alexander realized that his discovery of Marcus's secret activities was just the beginning of a much larger awakening. The servant's actions had revealed not just individual compassion, but systemic failures that Alexander, as future king, would need to address. The weight of this realization was both daunting and energizing. Finally, He had found a sense of purpose beyond the ceremonial aspects of royal life. As the day progressed, Alexander found himself paying closer attention to the castle staff and their interactions with each other. He began to notice subtle signs of the community and mutual support that existed among the servants, quick exchanges of assistance, shared resources, and quiet conversations that spoke of genuine relationships. He realized that while he had been feeling isolated, a rich social network had been operating around him that he had never bothered to acknowledge or understand. The insight was both humbling and enlightening. Alexander had been so focused on his own loneliness that he had failed to see the humanity and community that existed among the people who worked around him daily. Marcus's example had opened his eyes to the possibility that meaningful connection and purpose were available to him if he was willing to look beyond his own immediate concerns and engage with the world around him. That evening, Alexander made a decision that would change everything. Instead of taking his usual solitary walk through the castle corridors, he would return to the clearing where Marcus had been helping the displaced families. But this time, he wouldn't go as a hidden observer. He would go as someone ready to learn, to help, and to finally step into a role that felt authentic and meaningful. Alexander spent the afternoon gathering supplies from his own quarters, blankets, food items, and basic necessities that he could contribute to the community Marcus had been supporting. He also took time to write a letter to Marcus, explaining that he had discovered the servant's secret activities and expressing his admiration for the courage and compassion Marcus had shown. The letter was both an apology for his spying and a request to be included in the important work Marcus was doing. As midnight approached, Alexander made his way to the clearing, carrying his supplies and his letter. His heart was racing with nervousness and excitement. This felt like the most important decision he had ever made. For the first time in his life, he was choosing to use his position and resources for something that felt genuinely meaningful and necessary. When Alexander arrived at the clearing, he found Marcus already there with the community, as expected. The servant's surprise at seeing the prince emerge from the shadows was evident, but Alexander quickly approached with his hands visible, carrying his letter and supplies. The interaction that followed would prove to be the beginning of Alexander's transformation from an isolated prince to someone who understood the true meaning of leadership and service. Marcus's initial shock at seeing Prince Alexander in the clearing was quickly replaced by concern and confusion. The servant immediately stood and approached Alexander, clearly worried about the implications of the prince's presence in this secret location. Alexander could see the fear in Marcus's eyes, not fear of physical harm, but fear of what this discovery might mean for the people he had been helping and for his own position at the castle. Alexander quickly raised his hands in a gesture of peace and spoke quietly to avoid alarming the families gathered around the campfire. He explained that he had followed Marcus out of curiosity and had witnessed the servant's incredible work with the displaced community. Instead of expressing anger or disapproval, Alexander praised Marcus for his courage and compassion, explaining that the servant's actions had opened his eyes to what true leadership and service looked like. The conversation that followed was awkward at first, with Marcus unsure how to respond to praise from a member of the royal family for activities that clearly violated castle policies. Alexander had to work to convince Marcus that he genuinely admired what the servant was doing and wanted to help rather than interfere. The prince's sincerity eventually came through, and Marcus began to relax, though he remained cautious about the potential consequences of Alexander's involvement. Alexander then presented his letter to Marcus, explaining his desire to learn from the servant's example and to contribute to the work being done in the clearing. He also offered the supplies he had brought, demonstrating his commitment to action rather than just words. The gesture was symbolic but important. It showed that Alexander was willing to use his own resources to support the community rather than simply observing or offering empty praise. The families in the clearing had been watching this interaction with obvious concern and curiosity. Alexander realized that his presence, while well-intentioned, was potentially disruptive to the safe space that Marcus had created for these people. He asked Marcus to introduce him to the community and to explain the situation so that everyone could understand his intentions and decide whether they were comfortable with his involvement. Marcus's introduction of Alexander to the community was careful and diplomatic. He explained that the prince had discovered their gathering and had expressed a desire to help rather than cause trouble. Marcus emphasized that Alexander's participation would be entirely voluntary for the families, and that anyone who was uncomfortable with the prince's presence could express their concerns without fear of consequences. The response from the community was mixed but ultimately positive. While some adults were clearly nervous about having a royal family member witness their circumstances, others were curious about Alexander's motivations and interested in the additional support he might be able to provide. The children, less aware of the social complexities involved, were simply excited to meet a real prince and asked innocent questions about life in the castle. Alexander spent the rest of the evening participating in the community's activities, helping with simple tasks and learning about the individual stories and circumstances that had brought each family to this temporary living situation. He listened to accounts of job losses, housing difficulties, and various challenges that had led to their current need for assistance. Each story was a reminder of the real-world struggles that existed beyond the castle walls. The experience was profoundly educational for Alexander. He learned about the practical difficulties of finding affordable housing, the challenges of accessing health care and education services, and the complex web of circumstances that could lead to homelessness. These were issues that had never been covered in his royal education, despite their obvious importance to the people he would one day serve as king. As the evening progressed, Alexander found himself naturally falling into a helpful role within the community. He assisted with food preparation, helped organize supplies, and spent time reading to children who were having difficulty falling asleep. These simple acts of service felt more meaningful to him than any of the ceremonial duties he had performed throughout his life. The transformation in Alexander's understanding of his own purpose was immediate and profound. Instead of feeling isolated and disconnected, he felt energized by the opportunity to make a direct, positive impact on people's lives. The work was challenging and sometimes uncomfortable, but it was also deeply satisfying in ways that his privileged life had never provided. When it came time to return to the castle, Alexander made arrangements to meet with Marcus privately the following day to discuss how they could work together more effectively. He also promised the community that he would return regularly and would do everything in his power to help them find more permanent solutions to their housing and employment needs. The walk back to the castle was quiet, with both Alexander and Marcus processing the significance of what had just occurred. Alexander's discovery of Marcus's secret activities had evolved into something much more important, a partnership that could potentially help address some of the systemic issues that had led to the community's difficult circumstances. Alexander realized that his royal position, which had always felt like a burden, could actually be a powerful tool for positive change if used correctly. Instead of simply accepting ceremonial roles and formal duties, he could use his access to resources and influence to address real problems affecting real people. The revelation was both exciting and daunting, as it suggested a completely different approach to his future role as king. The next morning, Alexander found it almost impossible to concentrate on his usual royal duties. The contrast between the meaningful work he had done in the clearing and the ceremonial tasks that filled his official schedule was stark and uncomfortable. He struggled through meetings about protocol and etiquette, while his mind kept returning to the families he had met and the problems they were facing. When Alexander finally met with Marcus privately, the conversation was both practical and philosophical. They discussed the logistics of how Alexander could contribute to the work in the clearing without drawing unwanted attention from castle authorities. They also talked about the broader issues that had led to the community's circumstances and what kinds of systemic changes might be needed to address similar situations throughout the kingdom. Marcus proved to be not just compassionate, but also remarkably insightful about social and economic issues. His work with the displaced families had given him a deep understanding of the challenges facing ordinary citizens, knowledge that complemented Alexander's formal education, but had never been part of his royal curriculum. The servants' perspectives opened Alexander's eyes to the gap between official policy and lived reality. Alexander began to understand that his royal education had been incomplete in crucial ways. While he had learned about governance, diplomacy, and ceremony, he had never been taught about the daily struggles of the people he would one day serve. Marcus's example showed him that effective leadership required not just formal knowledge, but also direct experience with the communities and individuals who would be affected by royal decisions. The partnership between Alexander and Marcus grew stronger over the following weeks as they worked together to support the families in the clearing. Alexander contributed resources and connections, while Marcus provided experience, relationships, and practical knowledge about the community's needs. Together, they were able to make a more significant impact than either could have achieved alone. Alexander's involvement in the clearing became a transformative experience that changed his entire approach to his royal role. Instead of seeing his position as a burden or obligation, he began to view it as an opportunity to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. The work was challenging and sometimes frustrating, but it was also deeply fulfilling in ways that his previous life had never provided. As Alexander continued to work with Marcus and the displaced families, he began to develop a new vision for his future role as king. Instead of simply maintaining traditional ceremonial functions, he wanted to use his position to address systemic issues and create opportunities for people who had been marginalized or forgotten by existing systems. The transformation was profound and would have lasting implications for both Alexander's personal development and his approach to royal responsibilities. The success of their work in the clearing also highlighted the potential for collaborative efforts between different social classes and backgrounds. Alexander's resources and connections, combined with Marcus's experience and relationships, had created something more powerful than either could have achieved independently. This lesson would prove valuable as Alexander began to envision broader changes to how royal authority could be used to serve the common good. Alexander's late-night activities with Marcus and the displaced families had to be kept secret from the castle authorities. But this secrecy added an element of excitement and purpose to his life that had been missing for years. Instead of feeling trapped by royal protocols, he felt energized by the opportunity to work outside official channels to address real problems and help real people. The experience also deepened Alexander's relationship with Marcus beyond their original servant-prince dynamic. While they maintained appropriate public behavior, their private interactions became increasingly collaborative and respectful. Marcus's wisdom and experience were invaluable to Alexander's education, while Alexander's resources and connections provided new opportunities for the servants' charitable work. As weeks passed, Alexander began to see improvements in the lives of the families they were helping. Adults found employment opportunities, children received educational support, and several families were able to secure more permanent housing arrangements. These successes were deeply satisfying to Alexander and reinforced his commitment to using his position for positive change. The transformation in Alexander's sense of purpose and direction was evident to those around him, even though they didn't know the specific cause. His engagement in official royal duties improved as he began to see them as potential tools for broader social change rather than meaningless ceremonies. His interactions with staff became more respectful and authentic as he developed genuine appreciation for the work that others were doing. Alexander's partnership with Marcus had evolved into something that would fundamentally change his approach to royal life and leadership. The servant's example had shown him that true leadership meant using one's position and resources to serve others, particularly those who had been forgotten or marginalized by existing systems. This lesson would guide Alexander's decisions for years to come. The secret work in the clearing had also created a sense of community and purpose that Alexander had never experienced before. Instead of feeling isolated and disconnected, he felt part of something larger and more meaningful than his individual circumstances. The relationships he had built with Marcus and the displaced families had given him a new understanding of what genuine human connection looked like. As Alexander prepared for his eventual role as king, he began to develop plans for how he could institutionalize the lessons he had learned through his work with Marcus. Instead of simply maintaining traditional approaches to royal authority, he wanted to create systems that would address the root causes of problems like homelessness and unemployment. The experience had given him both the motivation and the knowledge needed to pursue meaningful reform. The discovery of Marcus's secret activities had initially been driven by Alexander's loneliness and curiosity, but it had evolved into something much more significant. The servant's example had shown Alexander what it meant to use one's position and resources for the benefit of others, and this lesson would guide his approach to leadership for the rest of his life. The transformation was complete. Alexander had found his purpose and his path forward. Years later, when Alexander had become king and had implemented many of the reforms he had envisioned during his time working with Marcus in the clearing, he would look back on that first night when he had followed his servant into the darkness as the moment when his real education had begun. The lonely prince who had felt disconnected from the world had become a leader who understood the true meaning of service and the importance of using power to help those who needed it most. The story of Alexander and Marcus would become a testament to the power of authentic human connection and the importance of looking beyond one's immediate circumstances to find meaning and purpose in service to others. Alexander's transformation from an isolated prince to a compassionate leader had been made possible by Marcus's example and by his own willingness to step outside his comfort zone and engage with the world around him. Marcus continued to work at the castle, but his role had evolved significantly. While he maintained his official duties, he also became an informal advisor to Alexander on matters related to social policy and community development. The servant's insights and experience were invaluable as Alexander worked to implement changes that would address the systemic issues they had encountered in their work with displaced families. The families they had helped in the clearing became success stories that demonstrated the potential for positive change when resources and compassion were combined with direct action. Many of the adults found stable employment. The children received educational opportunities, and several families were able to purchase homes and establish secure, independent lives. These outcomes validated the approach that Alexander and Marcus had developed together. Alexander's reign as king would be remembered for its focus on social justice and community development. The lessons he had learned from Marcus's example guided his approach to governance, emphasizing the importance of direct engagement with citizens and the use of royal authority to address real problems affecting real people. The transformation that had begun with a curious prince following his servant into the darkness had ultimately changed the entire kingdom. The partnership between Alexander and Marcus had demonstrated that meaningful change was possible when people from different backgrounds and circumstances came together around shared values and common goals. Their work had shown that authentic leadership meant using one's position and resources to serve others, particularly those who had been marginalized or forgotten by existing systems. As Alexander reflected on his journey from lonely prince to compassionate king, he recognized that his transformation had been made possible by Marcus's courage and example. The servant's willingness to risk his own security to help others had inspired Alexander to find his own courage and to use his position for the benefit of all his subjects. The discovery that had begun with curiosity had evolved into a lifelong commitment to service and social justice. The story of Alexander and Marcus would be told for generations as an example of how authentic human connection and shared commitment to helping others could transform individuals and entire communities. Their partnership had shown that real leadership meant looking beyond one's immediate circumstances to find ways to serve others, and that the most meaningful work often happened outside official channels and formal structures. Alexander's reign brought unprecedented focus on social welfare and community development to the kingdom. The programs he established were based on the direct experience he had gained through his work with Marcus and the displaced families, ensuring that royal policies were grounded in real understanding of citizens' needs and challenges. This approach proved highly effective and popular among the people. The clearing where Alexander had first discovered Marcus's secret activities was eventually transformed into a permanent community center that provided services and support to families in need. The center became a symbol of the kingdom's commitment to ensuring that no citizen was forgotten or left behind, and it served as a model for similar facilities throughout the realm. Marcus's influence on Alexander's development as a leader extended far beyond their initial work together. The servant's example had taught Alexander that true leadership required not just formal authority, but also genuine compassion, direct engagement with citizens, and willingness to challenge existing systems when they failed to serve people's needs. These lessons guided Alexander's approach to governance throughout his reign. The transformation that had begun with Alexander's late-night discovery had ultimately changed not just his own life, but the entire kingdom. The lonely prince who had felt disconnected from the world had become a leader who understood that his greatest responsibility was to serve others, particularly those who were most vulnerable and in need of help and support. Alexander's story demonstrated that sometimes the most important discoveries happen when we step outside our comfort zones and engage with the world around us. His curiosity about Marcus's activities had led to a transformation that changed his understanding of leadership, service, and the true meaning of royal responsibility. The journey from isolation to engagement had been challenging, but ultimately rewarding beyond measure. As Alexander looked back on his transformation, he understood that his greatest achievement had not been any single policy or program, but rather the fundamental shift in how he understood his role and responsibilities. Marcus's example had shown him that leadership meant using one's position and resources to serve others, and this lesson had guided every decision he made as king. The partnership between Alexander and Marcus had created a legacy that would inspire future generations of leaders to look beyond their immediate circumstances and find ways to serve others. Their work had shown that authentic leadership required not just formal authority, but also genuine compassion, direct engagement with citizens, and willingness to challenge existing systems when they failed to meet people's needs. Alexander's reign would be remembered as a time when the kingdom's commitment to social justice and community development reached new heights. The programs and policies he established were based on the direct experience he had gained through his work with Marcus, ensuring that royal authority was used to address real problems affecting real people. This legacy would continue long after Alexander's death. The story of the lonely prince who followed his servant into the darkness and discovered his true purpose would become a classic tale of transformation and service. Alexander's journey from isolation to engagement demonstrated that the most meaningful work often happens outside formal structures and official channels, and that authentic leadership means using one's position and resources to help others, particularly those who need it most.